All right, so picking up for part 2 of the Papercraft, we already have our image changed to the color blue. Just makes it easier for us to see the black lines that we're going to be adding on in a little bit to kind of cartoonize the image. One thing to kind of point out, in my layers palette off to the side here, I do have one layer labeled cartoon, one layer labeled backing, and one layer for the blue face. You'll notice that these bottom 2 layers are in the locked position. That just means then I'll only have access to this top layer to actually do the inking on. So if you're following along with the tutorial, this is pretty close to step number 13. And we'll get into a little bit further of what the backing layer and the cartoon layer is going to be for. So once you have your file all set up and it's looking like this, then you can move to step 4, which is inking a path. Now for this step, we kind of dive a little bit more into using a pen tool. And the pen tool is just off to the left side of the screen here. It looks just like this in this little area. So we're going to create a nice black outline version of our picture. We will first work on the long unbroken lines of the image and then maybe do a little bit of freehanding to get in some of the extra lines in there. But we want to make sure that we draw only on the cartoon layer. This step is very important. If you make a mistake and you go into a different layer, you do have to go back and start over. So just make sure that the cartoon layer is the one that's selected. The 2 tools that we'll be using is the pen tool and then the direction selection tool just under the type tool. We'll be using the pen tool to draw points and the direct selection tool to kind of modify the lines. We then create a path that we're drawing, temporary lines that Photoshop remembers, which serves as a guide for Photoshop to drop the ink over the top of. It's a really cool thing that can create, delete, or move points on these lines. So instead, kind of think of it as a string to create shape on the floor, and then moving that string around in any way that you want to, it creates any shape that you would like. So I'm flipping over to step 4, page 2. The first thing that we're going to need to do is kind of get our brush tool set up. So I'm going to go over to the left side of the screen here and click on my brush tool. And I want to make sure that I'm inking in the black. So down here, I just make sure that I have my black foreground color selected. And then up at the top, I want to change that to be the hard brush. So just make sure that you've got the round hard. And then as far as size goes, we're going to take that on down to maybe a 4 to 5 pixels. I think for this one, I'll just go with the 5. And then the rest of the little layer over here, we want to make sure it's on the normal. Opacity is set to 100, flow is set to 100, and smoothing, that can kind of just stay where it's at there too. So now I've got that all set up. Then we're going to go and select our pen tool and begin starting to do the outside curves of the face. So it's easier for me to kind of zoom in on the face itself and grab my pen tool, and I want to make sure that that is set to path, and I've got my black selected. And then the last little thing to check over is that you are on the cartoon layer. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and just start doing these outside lines of the face. So I'm going to start up at the top, and I put down my first anchor line, and I'm just going to drag. So I'm still holding my mouse button, just dragging those little handles out. And then the next little spot, I'm going to go right next to the ear here. And you're going to see, I'm still holding my mouse button. You're going to see that as I drag out those handles, I can really make a nice, soft, subtle curve that kind of follows the hairline. All right. And then the next little area that I'm going to go into is going to be, let's say, edge of the cheek right here. And that actually lined up pretty well, but I usually like to just make sure that my handles are dragged out in the direction of my next line. So then I'm going to go ahead and down to the bottom of the chin. And if I don't get it just right, I can go back in and make some adjustments to that. We don't want too many anchor points that the face looks sort of choppy. So I'm just kind of selecting, and I think I'm going to follow the hair over here and just give it a soft little curve and drag out my next one. Something like that. And then when I get back up to the top one, now I have completed that line. So now I have that shape kind of filled in. This is going to be important because we're going to be using these lines to add in color later on. So then the next thing I want to do while I'm still on my pen tool is I'm going to right click and I want to stroke the path. So add in, you can have it to brush or pencil, and just make sure that that is on the black, and it's just going to thicken down that line so you can see it right here on the cartoon layer. Once I click off from it, you see that it's now a solid shape. So if you don't do this step correctly, all kinds of strange things will happen. So make sure you are following step by step with the tutorial. I have everything broken down into smaller chunks for you. If you, so we're on page 3 of the tutorial. Make sure once again that you are on the correct layer. Your cartoon layer should currently be highlighted in gray, and the other 2 layers have the little lock signs on them. And we've already kind of added in our lines. Word of warning, don't add in too many points, otherwise the lines tend to get a little jagged looking. So just kind of pick and choose where you want to have those nice curves. And we have our path already stroked. So you would continue on, let's say going out to the outside of the hair here and doing that little hairline. You might go in and add a little bit of detail for the ears and to the other side. Depending on what your picture is, you might have a hairline across the forehead, 2 lines, which indicate for the eyebrows. You can use your pen tools, but I kind of prefer just doing freehanding with that part, but I'll leave that either or up to you. And just to check that, make sure that we have it the way we want, you can kind of grab your paint bucket. And I'm just going to keep it with the black here and just make sure, yep, I've got that whole area filled in. Now, I obviously don't want to keep it in the black, but that's just a good double check here. Now, for the freehanding, I'm going to zoom in. Let's say I've done everything with the hair. I've gone around the ears. And now it kind of comes into the more of the facial features. You can freehand this, or if you like working with the pen tool, you could do some of the curves that way. I think I'm going to switch over to freehanding and just adjust my brush size. And I still want to be able to fill these shapes in, so I'm just going to lightly go up and around the eyebrows and make sure I've got a nice full shape, and maybe come on down and do some of this contouring around the side of the nose. And if you feel like this brush is a little bit too big, I am zoomed in, but you could change up your brush size just by hitting the brackets on your keyboard and get a little bit more of those finer details in there. You would continue on anywhere where you see a little bit of some contouring lines. I don't really like how that one went, so I'm going to Control Z that. And maybe this little edge here for the side of the nose. I think I'm going to zoom or go in even smaller with my brush. And again, I'm just grabbing some of those contour. I still want it to be very cartoony. I don't like what I did there, so I'm just going to Control Z that one. And I keep kind of going up and around all of those individual areas. And it should take you at least one solid class period to get all of your details lined out and be ready to move on to the next step. So I'm going to flip on over. If you add in too many lines or too much of the contouring, then it starts almost like aging the image. So we really don't want that happening. So you got to be choosy and decide what areas you really want to highlight. And then just keep in mind that some of your areas of the face will not actually be transferred in the final Papercraft template. So like I said, pick and choose, decide what areas, but make sure you've got all of the major facial features. And I'm just going to give you a little sneak peek up here. I already have one that's kind of colored in, but you can see some of those lines. Again, not perfect. We want that cartoony look. This is going to be transformed onto a Papercraft tutorial or a template later on, so I'm not so worried about a ton of detail on here. I'll give you a little peek on that. This is what I'm talking about. So we're not actually using the entirety of the face. Close out of that and hide that grouping again. So then you would be at step 6, getting ready to add color. So let's pretend I have everything done. To add color to specific areas, you're going to use your paint bucket tool. And you're going to want to choose a color that's pretty close to your skin tone. So you could go up here under swatches and kind of take a look through here. You can play around in the color selection panel. And again, just so you have a little idea, this is how we go ahead and fill in those colors. So for eyebrows or highlights, lowlights in the hair, I might want to go a shade or two off as I'm kind of going through and choosing my colors. And that is going to take you up to page 17 in the tutorial. So at this point, once you have all your line work checked over, you're going to make a copy of the cartoon layer. So I'm just going to right click on here and let me scroll up to the top. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my layer. And I just want to duplicate the color areas that I just did. So you can see now here I have a cartoon copy and I have a cartoon layer. So in my layers, copy, cartoon layer, backing, and the face layer. All right, and we're going to go ahead and pause here as this leads you into step 7 of the tutorial. Again, make sure you're following through with the tutorial as I'm just giving you a really quick little rundown on how to get things started. As you're adding in color for the eye area, make sure you're addressing the different areas of the eye. So you've got your pupil, your iris, and the outside whites of the eyes. How much black outlining, that's completely up to you. For the lips, you're going to want to try out several different colors. If you wanted to go in here and add in some more line work for the individual hair strands, you could do that. Once you have everything kind of like this top part is here, that's going to take you up to step number 8, which is applying your face and your hair over the top of the tutorial. So I'll go ahead and pause it here and let you work through the second steps all the way to step 8. Again, make sure you're following the paper tutorial. And in the end, this is what we're going to be going for.